He. All persons having anything to do before the Honorable, the Justice E. Susan Gosh of the Superior Court, now sitting at Fall River within and for the Commonwealth. Draw near, give your attendance, and you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Court is now in session. Be seated, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Today is Monday, April 6, 2015. The case on trial is Commonwealth v. Hernandez, indictment BRCR 2013-0983. The Honorable E. Susan Gosh presiding.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Hope you all had a good long weekend. Let me ask you, did any of you discuss this case in any way, shape, or form with anybody at all since I last inquired? There are no affirmative responses. And have any of you seen or heard or read or overheard anything at all about this case or Mr. Hernandez? There are no affirmative responses. And have any of you done any research about this case or anything you think could be relevant to the case? There are no affirmative responses. And have any of you had any difficulty following any of my instructions about not talking about the case, avoiding anything about the case, or Mr. Hernandez not doing any research about the case, any of my instructions at all? There are no affirmative responses. You may call your first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Greenback, please.
Dr. Greenblatt.
This way, sir.
Please face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Sir, you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give to this court and this jury will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Greenblatt.
Morning.
Try to keep your voice up so everyone can hear.
Yes.
Could you tell us what your name is, please?
David J. Greenblatt.
How do you spell your last name?
Greenblatt.
Can you tell us how old you are?
69.
And where do you live?
Newton, Massachusetts.
And where do you work?
Tufts University School of Medicine in downtown Boston, and also Tufts Medical Center.
And among other things, are you a medical doctor?
Yes.
Could you tell us about your education, beginning with college and going through your medical training?
Yes, so Amherst College, 1966. Harvard Medical School, 1970. Then I was an intern in the Bronx at Montefiore Hospital, which is in Albert Einstein College of Medicine, from 70 to 71. Then from 71 to 72, I was a medical resident at what used to be Boston City Hospital, which is now Boston Medical Center. And then from 72 to 74, I did fellowship training in the field of clinical pharmacology at Massachusetts General Hospital and Harvard Medical School. Then from 74 to 79, I was on the faculty and staff and division chief of the clinical pharmacology unit at Massachusetts General Hospital. And then in 1979, moved to Tufts Medical School, where I, over the years, established a research program and also teach medical students and graduate students and do administrative work. So I'm now professor at Tufts University School of Medicine.
You mentioned that your field is clinical pharmacology.
Yes.
It was at some point.
Yeah, it is.
Could you tell the jury, please, what is clinical pharmacology?
Yes, that's the discipline in which the effects of drugs in humans are looked at, what their mechanisms of action are, how they're supposed to be used clinically and therapeutically to treat disease, and what their adverse effects are.
And can you tell the jury for how long you've been studying, teaching, and researching in the field of pharmacology?
Well, since the early 70s, so at least...
Up until now?
Yes.
Now, could you tell us what your present positions are at the Tufts University School of Medicine?
Yes, well, I'm professor of pharmacology and experimental therapeutics. I also hold professorships in psychiatry, medicine, and anesthesia. And I run a research program in psychopharmacology and other aspects of pharmacology at Tufts. I do teaching of medical students and graduate students at Tufts University, and I also do administration. In the past, I've served as the chairperson of the Institutional Review Board, which reviews human research. And I've also served as the department chairman of the Department of Pharmacology.
Dr. Greenblatt, you just used the phrase psychopharmacology. What is psychopharmacology as opposed to pharmacology?
It's kind of a subunit of clinical pharmacology dealing with the effects of drugs used to treat mental disorders, drugs of abuse, drugs that act on the brain and the nervous system.
And Dr. Greenblatt, are you certified by any boards in any specialty field?
Yes, I'm certified by the American Board of Clinical Pharmacology.
And what does that entail?
It entails taking an exam, knowing the subject matter.
And when did you become board certified?
I believe 1991.
Now, have you received any awards or honors in your profession?
Yes.
Have you received any awards or honors in your profession?
Yes.
Could you tell us about those, please?
In 1980, I received what's called the Rawls-Palmer Award from the American Society of Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics, which is an award for excellence in research. In 2005, I received an award for clinical research from the American Association of Pharmaceutical Sciences. In just this year, I received a Distinguished Faculty Award from Tufts University, which is awarded to people for excellence in research and teaching. There may be others.
Are you on the editorial board of any publications in your field?
Yes, I'm editor-in-chief of a journal called Clinical Pharmacology and Drug Development. I am co-editor-in-chief with Dr. Richard Shader of a journal called the Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology, and I also am on the editorial board of a number of other journals.
And have you authored any research articles?
Yes.
When I say research articles, could you describe what that means?
Well, research articles would be describing the results of original new research that was done by myself or my colleagues.
And are you familiar with the term peer-reviewed?
Yes.
And is that P-E-E-R?
Yes.
And what does peer-reviewed mean in your field?
It means that when you complete a scientific manuscript or paper based on research or whatever, and you submit it to a journal for publication, the journal will send the article out to experts for review. And they call it peer review because they're supposed to be people like us, and they anonymously review the paper and decide whether it's acceptable or not acceptable for publication, or most often they come back with things that they think need to be changed or revised before it can be published.
And over the course of your career, how many peer-reviewed articles have you authored or co-authored?
In the original research field, in the range of 760.
760 distinct articles.
Yes.
And have you authored chapters in any books that are in your field?
Yes.
Can you tell us how many times you've authored chapters in books?
I believe the number is over 100.
And have you authored any comments or editorials in journals in your field?
Yes.
And can you tell us how many times you've done that?
That would be in the range of 80 or so.
And how about any books? Have you authored or co-authored any books in your field?
Yes.
How many?
8 or 9, I think.
Now, do you have a document that gives the details of each and every one of these awards, articles, chapters, and books?
Yes.
I object. I'm going to offer it after Dr. Greenblatt. I object.
Yes.
Is that a copy of your curriculum vitae?
Yes.
And does that summarize the, or give the details of the awards, articles, chapters, and books that you've authored, that you summarized just a moment ago?
Yes.
Your Honor, to offer it. I object.
The objection sustained. You may, if he needs it to refresh his recollection, leave the document with the witness, and you may go through everything on the CV if you wish.
So, Dr. Greenblatt, using your CV, could you tell us that if in fact you've received some 20 awards over the course of your career? I'm sorry.
Yes,
14 awards?
Yes, that's correct.
Does that appear to be right?
Yes.
And these are all in the field of clinical pharmacology or psychopharmacology?
Yes.
And is it the case that you're on the editorial boards of 10 different publications in your field?
Yes, that's correct.
And these all concern pharmacology or psychopharmacology?
Yes.
And is it the case that you are a member of 8 professional societies?
Yes.
Now, you said that you've authored or co-authored in excess of 700 articles in peer-reviewed publications?
Yes.
Is it the case that you've authored or co-authored 762 of those articles?
Yes.
And can you tell us kind of the range of those research articles?
Well, they range from studies done in humans on the effect of psychiatric drugs on the behavior of people and how that may vary in relation to factors like age, gender, male or female, body habitus, whether somebody is thin or not thin or overweight, interactions of drugs, what happens when you give 2 drugs at the same time, how does that influence the effect of the drug. There are also studies done in a more basic science level, molecular studies of enzymes responsible for drug metabolism, and also studies of brain chemistry and the binding of certain drugs to receptors or recognition sites in brain. There are also studies, what we would call epidemiology, but studies of what happens when drugs are given to large numbers of people and the overall effects of these drugs in populations. Finally, there are studies on genetics and how the composition of genes and DNA can influence drug response and metabolism.
Now, your CV also set out the chapters in books that you've authored.
Yes.
And does that include 166 chapters or reviews in that area?
Yes.
And do those chapters and reviews generally concern the same subject matter that you just described in your peer review articles?
Yes.
And with respect to editorials, comments in journals in your field, is it the case that you've authored 82 of those?
Yes.
And with respect to books that you've authored or co-authored, have you in fact authored or co-authored 12 books?
Yes.
And again, the same general subject matter?
Yes.
And when you say drugs as a field of your work, are you talking both about legal drugs that can be prescribed and illicit drugs that are drugs of abuse?
Yes.
Now, you described your work as a professor at the Tufts University School of Medicine. Could you tell us what your teaching responsibilities have been over the years in terms of teaching medical students?
Yes. So over the years, I have been director of the course in pharmacology that is taught to medical students in the first or second year. That is the basics of pharmacology and what drugs do and what their mechanisms are. I also teach to medical students a course for seniors who are about to graduate and go into internship, and that we call clinical pharmacology, how to be an intern. So we try to teach them how you actually use drugs in humans so they can be prepared for what they face when they start in a hospital on July 1st. So that's medical students. We also teach graduate students who are looking for a PhD in pharmacology, a scientific degree, so they can ultimately be scientists. So there we're teaching there's a clinical component to it, but also more of a molecular component, or what the enzymes do and what the receptors do. So it's a mixture of graduate and medical school teaching. I also teach postgraduate pharmacology to people who are residents, training physicians in the hospital, and also to some national organizations as well.
Now, Dr. Greenblatt, were you retained by the defense to assist in this case in the fall of 2014?
Yes.
And what request did the defense make for you?
They asked me to formulate an opinion about the effects of PCP, or phencyclidine, in humans.
And what word did you use? Phencyclidine?
Yes.
Could you spell that for us, please?
PHENCYCLIDINE.
And is that the scientific term for PCP?
Yes, it is.
And does PCP have a street name that's familiar to you?
Yes, the one I know is angel dust, but there's a bunch of different street names.
Okay. And how did you go about doing your work in preparing to appear here?
I object. Could I be seen at the sidebar?
Dr. Greenblatt, what did you do to begin this engagement?
With respect to PCP?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Dr. Greenblatt.
Well, I had experience with understanding and teaching about substance abuse as part of what I normally do, because I have been teaching that for long before this case. In particular, for this case, I went to the peer-reviewed scientific literature and went through a number of sources to try to determine what is the state of knowledge prevailing in the scientific community about PCP and what its effects are.
Now, was there a time when PCP was a lawfully prescribed drug in the United States?
Yes, so going back to the 1950s and early 1960s, it was actually a legal drug used in anesthesia with surgery. It was thought to be a drug that reduced pain, so it was given along with other, like general anesthetics, in the course of surgery. So that persisted until the mid-1960s.
And was there a body of scientific knowledge built up over those years with respect to the effects of PCP on human beings?
Yes.
And could you describe the evolution of that knowledge between the 1950s when it became legal and the mid-1960s when it was no longer legal?
Right. Well, what was first observed when the drug was used in anesthesia was that when people were waking up from anesthesia, they were having very bad reactions. They were having hallucinations, delusions, agitated behavior, disconnection, feeling disconnected from their surroundings. Many of the effects that we know are related to schizophrenia or psychosis subjects or patients who are undergoing surgery were having when they were waking up. It was also observed in actual laboratory studies that when PCP was administered to humans under controlled conditions, it produced effects and thoughts and outcomes that looked very much like schizophrenia, so that people were having dissociation and feelings of disconnection and hallucinations and other adverse effects which looked very much like schizophrenia. So as a result of that, the drug was removed from the market in 1965.
Now, you used the term schizophrenia. Could you explain to the jury what schizophrenia is?
Right, well that's a mental illness in itself, which happens to a number of people, and we don't really know why it happens, but it can be very severe, and there are different kinds of symptoms. Some are related to what we call negative symptoms, where people are withdrawn and don't engage with their surroundings or with their family or their friends. They may have difficulty with thought and memory, difficulty holding on to information and processing it, and difficulty separating what's real from what's not real. Then there are also positive symptoms in which people have active hallucinations where they feel that people are talking to them, or they feel that they're being persecuted, somebody is after them, so-called paranoia. And occasionally they can, erupt into behavior that's harmful to themselves or others.
So those are the symptoms that manifest themselves when a person has schizophrenia.
Yes.
Now, with respect to the observations of the pharmacological community with respect to the use of PCP in the 1950s and 1960s, did those observations track the symptoms that had previously been observed in schizophrenics?
Yes, in fact, PCP was said to be a drug that is a model for schizophrenia. It produces something which is largely not distinguishable from schizophrenia.
And are you familiar with the term PCP psychosis?
Yes.
What is PCP psychosis?
Yes, that's what I was talking about, these reactions that people had when they were coming out of anesthesia, or when normal volunteers were given PCP in the laboratory in the early 60s, or as time went on, as experience was gathered with PCP abuse, as cases began to mount up, many of the people who were exposed to PCP developed this syndrome, which looks just like schizophrenia.
The PCP psychosis looks like schizophrenia?
Yes.
Now, once PCP was banned as a lawful drug in the mid-1960s, were further research studies done on humans using PCP?
Well, with maybe a couple of exceptions. Of course, it's because the drug has hazards, it wasn't possible to do research, controlled research on the drug where it was deliberately given to humans. So that largely stopped. But so the experience with it after the time it was banned would be based on abuse of PCP as a drug of abuse.
And in the years since it was banned as a lawful drug in 1965, have there been uses of PCP, legitimate or authorized uses of PCP in other sorts of studies?
Yes, it can't be given to humans, but it is used in experimental research, mostly as a model to look at what happens to the brain when there's schizophrenia. So it's still used in research in animal settings, but it's not given to humans.
And so since 1965, there haven't been controlled experiments with PCP on any significant scale?
Not to my knowledge, no.
And has there developed a body of knowledge in the pharmacological community about the effects of PCP since that time?
Objection. As I indicated previously.
Without going into the substance of it.
Overall.
Has there developed a body of...
Yes, I mean, over the years, we've started to learn...
The question is just, has there developed a body of
Yes.
knowledge?
I'm not trying to elicit the substance of what the scientific community has learned, okay?
Yes.
It is part of the way that scientists learn more about a certain area to gather information like this.
Yes.
All right. Now, with respect to the studies that were done between the late 1950s and 1965, were there studies that analyzed how frequently this sort of behavior would occur?
I object.
Sustained.
With respect, without going into the substance of it, of the answer, were there studies that looked at how prevalent this condition was?
I object.
Sustained.
Now, could you tell us, Doctor, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty what causes PCP psychosis?
Yes, I have an opinion.
All right. What's that opinion?
Well, over the years, it's been learned that PCP...
I object.
Sustained.
What is your opinion?
Just what's your opinion, not what you've learned from others.
Could you restate what the original question was? You lost?
Do you have an opinion about whether there's a causal relationship between PCP psychosis and the ingestion of PCP?
Yes.
And what's that opinion?
My opinion is that PCP ingestion can cause psychosis.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to what are the manifestations of this psychosis?
Yes.
What are the range of manifestations of this psychosis?
They are much the same as we talked about with schizophrenia. There can be negative symptoms that would be things like feeling disconnected, being in a trance state, having difficulty processing information, having difficulty telling what's real and not real, difficulty with cognition, that is solving problems, etc. Then we go to the more positive symptoms with active hallucinations, either hearing things or seeing things that are not there, or feelings of persecution, paranoid type problems, and on some occasions violent or aggressive behavior that can appear sometimes or unpredictably, and that might include behavior that could be harmful to themselves or to others.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty about the mechanism of how this psychosis arises?
Yes.
And what is that?
My opinion is that the known effects of PCP on the brain, that's the knowledge that's been developed over the decades, is that there are certain receptors or recognition sites in the brain that the drug attaches to and produces its effect by those attachment to so-called receptor sites. And the two principal receptor sites are one, it's called the NMDA receptor, which is thought to mediate the negative symptoms, and PCP attaches to that receptor and blocks it. Then the positive effects of schizophrenia are thought to be connected to another receptor called the dopamine receptor. Dopamine is a chemical in the brain that transmits impulses, and too much dopamine is bad because it produces schizophrenia and positive symptoms, and PCP also attaches to that receptor and stimulates it. So the effects of PCP psychosis that we see in people are consistent with what we know the effects on the brain to be.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to how long the symptoms can endure after the ingestion of PCP?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
The opinion is that it can vary from only a few hours after exposure to effects that can persist for hours or days or even weeks or months after ingestion. So the effects are not necessarily confined to the period of immediate when you last took it. They can last much longer than that.
And do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to how quickly the manifestations of a psychosis can dissipate?
Yes, they can appear and disappear quickly and unpredictably. They may come and go over a period of time.
And are there any physical manifestations of PCP ingestion?
Sometimes there are, but not always.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, when there are, it can be things like slightly elevated blood pressure, or being easily startled, or sweating, or shaking, or aimless behavior, but that doesn't necessarily happen.
Now, in your career, have you treated people who have used PCP?
I can't recall for sure, but I may have in the course of early training when I spent time in...
I object to anything after I can't recall for sure.
Objection sustained.
At any point in your training, did you come to treat people who were suffering from acute instances of drug abuse?
Yes.
And did that include any instances that you came to believe were from PCP abuse?
I object.
Oh, well, it may have.
Is it the case that you have not gone back and looked at the particular cases?
I object. I object to the form of the question.
The objection is sustained.
Now, do you have an opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, as to whether PCP ingestion can cause violent behavior?
Yes,
What's that opinion?
it can cause violent behavior.
And what's the basis for your opinion?
The basis is the known effects of PCP on brain chemistry, together with accumulated experience of many, many cases of PCP abuse that are reported in the
I
literature.
object.
Objection sustained.
I'd ask that the answer be stricken.
What is actually found in the literature is ordered stricken.
Is part of the basis for your opinion your review of the medical literature?
I object.
Overruled.
Yes,
And is that something that you were familiar with before last fall,
yes,
and that you looked at in particular as a result of our request?
yes,
And you testified that the manifestations of the PCP use can be intermittent.
yes.
What's the basis for that opinion?
Again, the experience from reviewing this literature.
Objection sustained.
Is that based on your experience teaching and research?
Yes,
And when you use the term intermittent, what do you mean by that?
that means that it comes and goes unpredictably.
Now, in terms of diagnosing someone with PCP psychosis, how would one go about doing that?
Well, you would like to have some reliable history of PCP exposure, either immediately or sometime in the past. You would also like to have measurement of the drug either in blood or urine.
Could you look at a person without any context to it and make a determination?
I object.
Sustained to the form of the question.
What conclusions could you draw, if any, from observing a person as to whether or not they were under the influence of PCP?
Only from observation, I don't think you could determine.
That's all. Thank you, Dr. Greenblatt.
Well, have you diagnosed anybody with PCP psychosis in relationship to this case?
No,
Were you provided any evidence by Mr. Rankin or Mr. Sultan in relationship to this case?
no,
And it's fair to say that prior to the fall of 2014, you yourself had no direct experience with people in PCP psychosis, true?
not true. As I mentioned, I may have had experience as an emergency room physician in the early 70s.
May have is not actual, isn't that correct, doctor?
Well, I answered the question.
Well, the question is, may have does not equal having experience, isn't that
Well,
correct?
but my answer is may have.
Well, okay, so please tell us then, doctor, the circumstance under which you have direct experience with somebody with PCP psychosis.
I think I answered that. As an emergency room physician in the 70s, I treated drug abuse, alcoholism, heroin overdose, use of hallucinogens, and PCP may have been among those drugs. But since years have elapsed, I can't say for sure.
Right, and in fact, this isn't the first time you've ever testified in a courtroom, isn't that correct, doctor?
That is correct.
And on other occasions, including in an article that you published in the New England Law Review, you have repeatedly said that the only way to tell whether or not someone is under the influence of anything is to have a confirmed test, preferably and almost exclusively by the form of a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that was, I previously answered that.
Okay. And so you would need, would you not, in order to answer my question, an actual GCMS test related to someone who was experiencing some bad effect of a drug.
I would like to see chemical validation, yes.
And in fact, you've repeatedly said that's the only way to make that determination. Isn't that true?
I don't think I've repeatedly said that, but I would like to see a chemical determination,
Well, how
yes.
many times have you said that, Doctor?
I don't know, I don't
You
know.
published a whole article about it, did you not?
Yes, that had to do with drug testing.
Right,
In the
in fact,
context
in that
of, can I finish the answer?
You may finish. I
It has to
apologize.
do with, that had to do with the context of drug testing for, let's say, pre-employment, when people are undergoing drug tests before starting a job to see whether they're drug abusers. And the point I made there is that if somebody is going to be accused of being a drug abuser, they should have a test that's validated, whether it's blood or urine.
And in fact, in that article, what you also said was that athletes should not be tested. Isn't that true?
I'm not sure I said that. I said that people should be tested if there is cause for testing, but I don't think that people should be randomly tested without cause. That's what I said.
In fact, your article is an argument against testing amateur and professional athletes. Isn't that correct?
If there is no cause for testing.
Well, at that time, you were suggesting that there was no reason to believe that steroids were actually having an effect on performance in athletics. Isn't that true?
No, that's not true.
Well-
I'm not sure I took that up. The point is that I don't think that people should be tested without cause because they're innocent. If there's cause, that's another story.
Particularly, athletes shouldn't be tested. That was your point. Isn't that correct?
I think it holds for athletes and anybody else.
Okay. And it's fair to say, just as you've described to us, you don't, prior to being contacted by counsel in this case, you had no confirmed case yourself through GCMS testing of a person who was in any potential psychosis due to PCP. Isn't that correct?
I think I answered that before. As a physician in the early 70s when I was in the emergency room, I treated drug overdosage, alcoholism, heroin abuse, and I may have treated PCP abuse, but I can't specifically recall.
And you wrote a single article related to that out of the 700-plus articles that you've described for us? That this drug abuse observations that you made?
The article that I recall was written in the early 70s in the American Journal of Psychiatry.
You recall writing an article in 1974 titled Drug Abuse and the Emergency Room Physician.
That's correct.
Okay. And in that article, what you described is that an emergency room physician should be loath to use sedatives and tranquilizers in relationship to a person who's in a potential circumstance of a drug intoxication. Isn't that correct?
I don't recall.
It's fair to say that article had nothing to do with PCP. Isn't that true?
That I don't recall.
Okay. And so when you say you don't recall, you're telling us that there's no basis to conclude that there was anything about PCP in that article.
What I'm saying is I don't recall the content of the article.
Okay. Well, it's fair to say it didn't include anything about PCP.
I don't know. I haven't reviewed the content of the article.
Okay. Well, do you want to have an opportunity to do that?
Not my call.
Is there something that you can do to provide us with a positive answer about that, Doctor?
Positive answer to
One
what?
way or the other, whether or not it contained anything to do with PCP. Is there something that you can do?
If you want me to review it, I'll review it, but
Do you have it with you?
no,
Do you have access to it?
not here.
You knew you were coming to speak about PCP today, Doctor?
Yes?
Okay. And it's fair to say that these other articles that you've written, not a one of them has anything to do with PCP. Isn't that true?
That I don't recall.
Okay. You have with you your CV there.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin just provided it to you,
Correct.
right? Do you want to review that to see whether or not any article you've ever written has anything to do with PCP?
Well, I couldn't tell without seeing the article, particularly if they were written 40 years ago.
Okay. So when you say you don't know, essentially, you have no memory that it does, isn't that true?
I said I don't recall, which means I don't have a memory of if it did or it didn't.
Doctor, these articles that you've written, you've testified previously about the source of information on occasion that you get in order to write these 700 or so articles, isn't that correct?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
You rely, all of these articles that you've written, they're not all your own original research, are they?
Well, the first 762 are.
You rely on information that other people have gathered, isn't that true?
Well, we rely principally on the research information that we've generated ourselves, but we consider what others have done.
Well, do you recall testifying in a case in California about the effects of a drug called Halcyon?
Yes. I will say I have testified about Halcyon in the past. I don't recall California.
You flew out to Los Angeles to testify in a case where the defendant's name was Yamaguchi. Do you recall that?
I can't say as I recall.
Okay. And you testified there as to the source of your articles on Halcyon, isn't that correct?
I don't recall.
They relied on drug company research, isn't that true?
That I don't recall, but I can tell you that we rely on all research to come to conclusions, no matter who the sponsor is.
Right. And in fact, in that case, you testified that you couldn't even remember whether or not you examined the underlying data that you reported in your own article.
I don't remember, sir.
Well, you did testify to that, did you not?
I really don't remember.
Do you disagree with me that you
I didn't
testified
say
to that?
that. I said I don't remember.
Okay. So I guess the question, Doctor, is you have no memory about a number of these things. Can you tell us whether or not you write articles that are, these 700 and some articles that you've written, that are based on other people's data that you simply report?
If it's original research, it might involve other people's data, but essentially all of them are original analyses or original data that we've produced in our own laboratory or with our own research.
And you've testified in other cases that sometimes it takes you as little as 15 minutes to write those articles, isn't that true?
No, I never said anything.
You never said anything like that? Matter of
Not
hours
that
sometimes?
I can't imagine saying that. No.
A matter of hours sometimes to write these articles?
It takes a long time to write articles. I don't
Do you
really
recall
know.
previously testifying in other cases that particularly when you're relying on other people's data, you can write these articles fairly quickly?
I don't recall that.
Okay. None of these awards that you've ever received have anything to do with PCP, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you've never published any articles about PCP or PCP psychosis, isn't that true?
With the exception of the one or maybe more, but certainly the one that we discussed previously.
One or maybe more now?
Well, there may be others. I didn't go through everything that's
Well, would you
previously
accept,
written.
Doctor, that I've been through each of your 700 and some articles, and not a one of them have PCP?
I mean, I hear what you say. I don't know whether it's valid or not.
Okay, you've had an opportunity to go through your articles.
No, I haven't. I haven't done that.
What would the title potentially be of a different article that is related to PCP?
There is no way to tell.
And it's fair to say that prior, your testimony here now in front of the jury that the effects of PCP psychosis can come and go quickly, that's different than what you just previously testified to before the jury came in, isn't that correct?
No, it can. I testify that it's unpredictable. It could come quickly. It could come slowly. You can't tell what's going to happen.
You previously testified that you have no idea how long it would last, isn't that correct?
That's correct. But
Okay.
that's not what you asked. You asked about coming and going.
Well, that's what Mr. Rankin asked you. Do you recall that?
What am I supposed to recall? Tell me again.
That you just agreed with Mr. Rankin that it can come and go quickly.
It can come and go quickly. It can come and go slowly.
Right. But you previously said you have no idea how long it would last.
That's
You
correct.
recall that?
Yes.
So when you're testifying now that it can come and go quickly, that's different than what you previously testified to.
It is not at all different. It is the same.
Okay. Describe for us, please, doctor, a person who is intoxicated by the effects of PCP. How do they appear, please?
They may appear normal, or they may have symptoms such as slightly elevated blood pressure, aimless movements, maybe sweating, maybe fast heart rate, maybe some shakiness or tremulousness.
Okay. And when you say they may appear normally, you'd agree with me then that absent a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer analysis, you couldn't opine anything about whether or not they're under the influence of PCP.
I'm sorry, what does the mass spectrometer have to do with?
If somebody appears normal,
Yes?
you'd have no understanding whether or not they're under the influence or intoxicated by PCP absent a GCMS.
Or a reliable history of ingestion.
And describe for us, doctor, these in PCP psychosis, is that different than PCP intoxication?
Well, it's all part of the same thing.
They just one leads to the next?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay. You'd agree with me, doctor, that there are plenty of other drugs and substances that are correlated with violence. Is that true?
There are others, yes.
Okay. And specifically, doctor, could you tell us whether or not the drug or the substance alcohol is correlated with violence?
There are reports of people committing violent acts after alcohol. The exact relationship is not really clear.
You'd agree with me that alcohol is much better understood and more easily studied than PCP, isn't that true?
Well, it's legal, and there's much more extensive exposure. I mean, everybody drinks alcohol.
And in fact, alcohol reduces inhibitions to violence, isn't that true?
No, alcohol reduces inhibition.
Somebody who drinks no longer is as inhibited to act in certain ways they were before, isn't that true?
Maybe, maybe,
And
maybe.
if they're violent, the violence is actually an extension of what they were before the inhibition went away, isn't that correct?
Could you say that again?
When a person under the influence of alcohol is violent, it's not that the alcohol has made them violent, it is that the alcohol has reduced their inhibition to acting in that way. Isn't that correct?
It may be that alcohol-related violence is just a release of violence that was already there.
That's thought to be the mechanism. Isn't that true?
That's a possible mechanism, yes.
And you'd agree with me, doctor, somebody who arms themselves, that is a person who has very little inhibition to violence, isn't that?
I don't know.
Okay. Doctor, what would cause somebody to leave from a club and go and retrieve a firearm from a car?
Objection, Your Honor.
Well, what about marijuana, doctor?
Yes, what about it?
Do you have an opinion about marijuana
In what context?
in the context of violence?
Yes.
What is that, doctor?
I don't know of any evidence that marijuana causes violent behavior.
And do you know, doctor, whether or not the use of marijuana and alcohol is related to lessening of an inhibition towards violence?
My understanding would be that if there were a lessening of inhibition, that it would be attributable to the alcohol.
Now, can you tell us, doctor, you described negative and positive aspects of psychosis, is that correct?
Yes.
And you indicated that there are a number of things that are both, first the negative symptoms and then the positive symptoms of psychosis, and then you finally got to, in some circumstances, there is harm done to the person themselves or potentially harm done to other people, is that correct?
Yes.
And you'd agree with me, doctor, that in fact, that very last category, that is the very smallest subset of potential outcomes of the use of PCP.
I don't necessarily agree with that.
And in
no.
fact, doctor, that there are a number of, are you familiar, doctor, with Harvey Feldman?
No.
Okay. Are you familiar, doctor, with Martin Brecker?
No.
Are you familiar?
Excuse me, is that the Brecker from UMass?
It is not the Brecker from UMass.
Then I'm not.
Now, your own publication, the Journal of Clinical Psychopharmacology, that is a journal in which articles that are published there are peer-reviewed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in fact, doctor, your journal published an article in which there was an analysis of the reported cases of violence and determined that there was no known association between PCP and violent behavior. Isn't that true?
Is that the 1988 article?
That
Yes,
is
and
the-
that's the case. I think you have it wrong. I think what it said was that we don't know what the real prevalence is. We don't know how often it happens. And that we need additional information and research to determine that.
Well, it said, doctor, did it not, that reviewing all of the information that was available, there was no established link between PCP and violence.
I don't think you have that right.
You reviewed that article, doctor?
At the time or now?
Either.
I don't recall if I reviewed it at the time, but I did review it now, yes. In the context of this.
These findings, plus the pre-1970 prospective evaluation of thousands of patients with PCP in which violence was never reported, led us to conclude that clinical and forensic assumptions about PCP and violence are not warranted. Does that refresh your recollection as to what Dr. Brecker said in his article published in your journal?
Well, we should read the rest of it. It doesn't say that PCP doesn't cause violence, because it does.
Do you disagree with what I just said?
I can't agree or disagree because you've taken it out of a larger article.
If I could, doctor. I'm going to ask you to take a look at your monitor there, doctor.
Yes, sir.
Now, prior to today, doctor, have you ever seen this video?
Prior to today?
Yes.
No.
Now, would you agree with me, doctor, that the moving of items from the inside of the car to the trunk, to the examining of the items, to putting on clothes, that's all purposeful behavior, is it not?
I can't tell what the purpose is. I'm only seeing a
Well, not what
video.
you might do, but
No, I said I couldn't tell.
I understand that. Not what you might do in that circumstance, but what these people are doing here, doctor.
I don't know.
Is there anything about what you're observing there that indicates that anybody is intoxicated by the use of PCP?
I can't tell if they are or they're not.
Okay, can you tell whether or not anybody appears to be in a, exhibiting positive symptoms of PCP psychosis?
I simply can't tell from this video.
You'd agree with me, doctor, that people who are intoxicated you can, as you've indicated, make, on the basis of your own clinical observations, make observations that someone is intoxicated, correct?
I'm sorry.
You described to us, doctor, that you have no memory of ever performing a GCMS analysis on anybody who was under the influence of PCP, correct?
Is this, are you still talking about the video or something else?
I'm asking you a question, doctor.
Well, what's the question?
You've told us that you may have made observations of people under the influence of PCP in the absence of having a GCMS examination of their bodily fluids, correct?
I don't recall saying that, but if you have a reliable ingestion history and if you have behavior that's consistent with it, then you could probably diagnose
It's
it.
fair to say when someone appears in the emergency room, you don't get a reliable ingestion.
Well, you might get from a family member or from somebody who brought them in. I mean, you try to get a history of what went on.
You'd agree with us that that is frequently not what happens, and in fact, in your article about drug abuse and the emergency room physician, that's exactly what one of the things that you're talking about, right? The fact that people come in without reliable histories.
Well, I don't recall, again, the content of the article, but the idea is to attempt to get a reliable history, not necessarily from the person, but from family members, friends. They may come in and they say, this person ingested something, so you try to take that into consideration when
Or
you
they
try
appear
to
to be
dig. Let me finish, please. You try to take that into consideration when you treat the patient.
Where they appear to be intoxicated, right?
If they appear to be intoxicated, or maybe they're not intoxicated and they've been said to ingest a large amount of harmful material. So you try to put together the information as best you can.
Okay.
And may I also say that GC mass spec was not invented in the early 70s, so that wasn't an option available to me.
People who come in close contact here, they, particularly this person here in the foreground, they'd have had an opportunity to make observations about intoxication, would they not?
What is the question?
Doctor, people who are intoxicated give off signs of being intoxicated, do they not?
Well, that's what we've been talking about. Sometimes they may and sometimes they don't.
And in your opinion, with PCP, you can be under the, or you can be intoxicated, not just under the influence, intoxicated by the use of PCP, come into close contact with somebody and they would not perceive that.
That's possible, sure.
Is it likely, doctor?
I don't know.
And when you say you don't know, what do you mean by that?
You can't tell. It's unpredictable.
So, is it fair to say that you can't tell anything about PCP?
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, well, PCP is not necessarily present in order to have violence, correct?
That is correct.
And the presence of PCP, its use by somebody, doesn't necessarily lead to violence, isn't that correct?
That is correct.
You cannot predict yourself whether that is the case or not, isn't that true?
Yeah, that's the whole point. When somebody has taken PCP, you can't tell what will happen.
No, you can't tell,
Well, it cannot be determined what will happen.
prospectively.
Well, that's the only way you go. You can only go forward.
You'd agree with me that PCP-violence, the psychosis that you're describing, when it occurs, it is rare?
No, I don't agree with
You don't agree
that.
with
We don't really know the prevalence. There's no question that it happens. In my view, there's no question that it happens.
Do you know how many people in the United States have used PCP?
I don't know.
In the millions, is it not?
think there are, over the years, many people have used PCP.
And many people who use PCP use it on multiple occasions, true?
Yes.
And it's fair to say there are not millions of extremely violent PCP-related incidents. Isn't that true?
We don't know the number.
What do you mean you don't know?
We don't know the number.
We have no way of knowing the number.
I don't think there's a way of knowing the number.
You'd agree with me, Doctor, there are not millions of PCP-related incidents of extreme violence.
I don't know how many there are.
You would agree with me, Doctor, that in fact, it is extremely unlikely that a person under the influence of PCP would be able to repeatedly engage in aimed fire of a handgun.
Oh, that I don't know.
Well, you agree with me, Doctor, that operating a semi-automatic handgun requires both a knowledge of the gun and coordination in order to aim and hit the intended target repeatedly.
Sir, I really don't know.
Okay. Would you agree with me that that type of coordination and movement is inconsistent with what you just described as the positive symptoms of PCP-induced psychosis?
No, it is not inconsistent.
You don't think that's inconsistent?
No.
Okay. How long does PCP-induced psychosis last, Doctor?
It's highly variable and unpredictable.
Okay. And when you say highly variable and unpredictable, can you give us the longest extent of how long PCP-induced psychosis lasts?
It's been reported to last for months.
Okay. And can you describe for us, please, Doctor, the shortest period of time in which it would last?
That I don't know.
You only know the longest?
Yes.
Okay. You'd agree with me, Doctor, that it would be more than minutes?
No, I don't know.
You don't know or no?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Have you had an opportunity to look inside of a Nissan Altima
No.
related to this case?
No.
People who are in the throes of PCP psychosis, Doctor, can you describe in the positive aspects the type of violence as you described that sometimes happens?
They can harm themselves or they can harm others.
Okay. As it relates to harming others, Doctor, tell us how, in your opinion, that happens.
Well, there are many possibilities. There could be an attack. There could be an attack on the whole body, on a limb. There are many possibilities.
People acting uncontrolled, is that correct?
That may or may not be controlled.
Okay. So would you agree with me that if somebody is in the throes of this sort of PCP psychosis, exhibiting the positive symptoms of violence against somebody else, that the most likely manner in which that's going to happen is uncontrolled?
No.
You wouldn't agree with that?
No.
You'd think that it would be controlled violence?
Might be.
And when you say might be, a reasonable degree of medical certainty, is that your opinion?
My opinion is that it's possible, but can't say for sure because the whole thing is unpredictable and variable.
When you say possible, what is possible?
It means it could happen or maybe it wouldn't happen. You just don't know.
And there'd be some sign, would there not, of this PCP-induced, positively psychotic violence?
Maybe.
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 So somebody who is somehow driven to violence solely by the presence of PCP inducing a psychosis that results in a violent outcome, there may or may not be some sign or symptom that, or evidence left that that's what happened.
Evidence left?
Right.
What do you mean?
I'm going to show you Exhibit 212, Doctor. Ask you to take a look at that. Do you see what's depicted in Exhibit 212?
Yes.
Do you recognize that to be the inside of a car?
It looks like the inside of a car, yes.
Okay. See that front driver's seat?
Yes?
You'd agree with me, no damage to the front driver's seat?
Oh, that I don't know. I can't tell.
What about rear, behind the driver's seat,
I don't know.
front passenger seat?
Don't know.
Rear passenger seat?
Don't know.
Don't know what, Doctor?
The answer to your question is I don't know.
No evidence of damage in any of those places, isn't that correct?
No, I can't tell one way or the other.
Going back to Exhibit 150, Doctor. Prior to today, have you ever seen this video before?
Not prior to today, no.
Doctor, would you ever turn your back on somebody if they had just engaged in some PCP-induced psychosis, violence?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
From the time of the arrival of that vehicle now, Doctor, to this point, have you observed any evidence of hostility amongst those three people?
I can't tell if there's hostility or not.
Have you observed,
I didn't see anybody attack anybody, but I can't tell. There may be hostility. You just don't know.
Have you observed any evidence of positive symptoms of psychosis in that video, Doctor?
I can't say whether there is or there isn't.
Have you observed any negative symptoms of psychosis?
Can't say if there is or there isn't.
Okay. You'd agree with me, Doctor, that one of the things that happens is when people are experiencing this PCP psychosis, they start taking their clothes off?
No.
No? The body gets hot because it loses its ability to regulate its temperature?
That can happen, but certainly is not necessary.
Okay. It can happen. You agree with me, you don't see that there? True?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay. You don't see any of these other symptoms that you've described? True?
I can only see what you saw.
You see an absence of all symptoms, isn't that correct, Doctor?
I see just people walking around a car.
They appear to be purposeful in their movement?
I can't tell if they're purposeful or not.
Do you see any signs and symptoms of PCP intoxication in that video, Doctor?
I can't tell one way or the other.
Do you see any signs and symptoms of the negative symptoms of PCP-related psychosis in that video, Doctor.
Cannot tell one way or another.
You'd agree with me, Doctor, this is essentially 3 minutes after the murder. You'd expect to see something lingering if PCP psychosis or PCP intoxication was related to the murder.
No,
You would not.
no, not necessarily. It might, but you just can't tell.
You just can't tell.
That's right.
Nothing further. Is this your time for a break?
Discuss the case among yourselves or with anyone
Am I
else.
still here?
Yes, you are. Yeah, you don't have to stay in the, after the jurors leave, you can go out in the hallway, but you're going to be...